The first thing people noticed was not the candy spilling into the gutter. It was the pregnant girl on her knees, one hand clutching her belly, the other scraping wrappers from the dirty road, while strangers laughed and stepped around her like she was nothing. Then a black luxury car stopped inches away. The street fell silent. Asante lifted her face through tears, weak trembling, humiliated beyond words. The man who stepped out looked too rich, too calm, too powerful to care. But when his eyes met hers, something changed. And before anyone understood, why Asante collapsed at his feet.
Before we go on, tell me in the comments, what country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if stories like this move, you subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next part.
By the time the sun rose fully over Lagos, the city had already decided what kind of mercy it was willing to give, and it was never much. It offered noise before kindness, dust before comfort and judgment, long before understanding. On most mornings, Asante was already awake before the buses began groaning through the streets, before the office workers stepped out in pressed clothes, before the traders arranged tomatoes, dried fish belts, phone chargers, and second-hand shoes in neat rows along the roadside. She had learned that survival belonged to those who stood up before hunger became louder than willpower. She slept in places no one was meant to sleep. Some nights it was under the narrow shade of a closed shop with a torn banner hanging above the entrance. Other nights it was beside a woman who sold roasted corn and took pity on her after everyone else had turned their faces away. When the rain came, she moved under bus-stop shelters and prayed it would not last long enough for the cold to settle into her bones. She was 6 months pregnant, though. In the loose dress she wore, many people noticed only when she stood sideways or when she rested a hand over the ache in her lower back and closed her eyes for one dangerous second. Each morning she bought small packets of sweets from a wholesale kiosk, run by a hard-faced woman who counted every coin, twice, and never once asked if Asante had eaten. The candies were cheap, colorful, and easy to carry in a shallow plastic bowl. Children liked them if their parents were not too angry, and conductors on the minibuses sometimes bought 2 or 3 to stop her from lingering near the door. On a good day, she sold enough to buy bread sachet water and perhaps a plate of rice from a roadside seller if she stretched her earnings carefully. On a bad day, she counted her coins until evening and wondered whether the child inside her could feel hunger, the same way she did. That morning had started like many others, except for the sharp cramp that caught her before dawn and made her bend over with both hands on her thighs until the wave passed. She waited, breathing through it, then whispered to the baby, as though the little life inside her could hear reason. "Not today," she murmured. "Please, not today. Let me work first." There was no one beside her to answer. No mother, no sister, no husband. No friend who could say, "Sit down, rest, I will carry this burden with you." The city had a way of swallowing names and reducing lives into conditions. To most people, she was not Asante. She was that pregnant girl by the traffic light. That girl selling sweets. That shameful girl. That unfortunate one. That foolish one. By mid-morning, she had taken her usual position, near a busy junction, where cars slowed just enough for hawkers to weave between them before the lights changed. The air smelled of petrol-fried plantain, hot metal and open drains. Horns burst from every direction. Men shouted over prices. A preacher with a portable speaker declared judgment on the unrepentant. A young woman in clean office clothes passed with the sharp click of heels and turned her handbag inward when she saw Asante approaching. A schoolboy stared openly at her belly until his mother jerked him away. Asante kept her face steady. She had learned not to beg with her eyes. She only raised the bowl a little and said softly, "Candy, madam." "Candy, sir. Very cheap." Sometimes the words worked. More often they slid off people like rain off plastic. At the third light, Change an old taxi driver bought 2 packets and added 1 extra coin. "For the baby," he said without looking at her directly, as if kindness embarrassed him. "Thank you," Asante replied, and for a moment the tightness in her throat loosened. But Lagos did not let gentle moments live long. Near noon, when the heat had turned the road into a glare of white and gold, 4 young men came swaggering toward the junction from the direction of a betting shop. They were not much older than she was. Their shirts hung open. One wore dark sunglasses, though the lenses were cracked. Another carried a bottle wrapped in black nylon. They moved with the careless confidence of men who believed public spaces existed for their amusement. One of them spotted her and laughed before he even reached her. "See this one," he said loudly, pregnant and still chasing cars. The others laughed with him. Asante lowered her eyes and shifted slightly away. Experience had taught her that sometimes silence allowed cruelty to pass faster. "Madam Candy," another called, stepping in front of her so she could not move toward the line of cars. "Who gave you that belly? Was it a driver, a pastor, or all of Lagos together?" The men erupted again. A few people nearby glanced over, then quickly looked elsewhere. A woman buying oranges shook her head but said nothing. A bus conductor grinned from his door. Asante swallowed and tried to step around them. "Please let me pass." The tallest one leaned close enough for her to smell alcohol on his breath. "Pass and go where to your husband's house." More laughter. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the bowl. She could feel the baby shift inside her, as if disturbed by the tension in her body. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to disappear. But there were cars at the light, and if she could just sell a few more packets before the afternoon slowed, she might afford food. Hunger had a way of making dignity negotiate with pain. "Please," she said again, quieter now. The man with the cracked sunglasses reached into the bowl, took a packet and tossed it from one hand to the other. How much Asante named the price. He tore it open, popped a sweet into his mouth, and made a face. Terrible. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he threw the packet onto the road. The others cheered. Before she could bend to retrieve it, another young man slapped the bottom of the bowl with the back of his hand. The movement was fast, casual, almost playful, and that made it worse. The bowl flew from her grasp. Candy packets scattered across the hot asphalt, skidding toward tires, gutters, and muddy edges of the road. Bright wrappers flashed like bits of broken color in the dust. For 1 second, Asante simply stared. It was not only the loss. It was the humiliation of watching the whole day spill apart in front of strangers who found it entertaining. It was the knowledge that every packet on the ground was a coin she had already borrowed into hope. It was the child inside her, the emptiness in her stomach, the swollen ache in her feet, and the sudden understanding that if she cried now, these men would enjoy that too. One of them clapped mockingly. "Pick them now, quick before the cars eat your business." The traffic light changed. Engines growled. A packet burst under a tire. Asante dropped to her knees. The road burned through the thin fabric over her legs, but she barely felt it. She reached for the nearest sweets, then another, gathering dust-covered packets into shaking hands. Tears blurred her vision, though she tried fiercely not to let them fall. Around her, shoes passed. Cars edged forward. The young men laughed and drifted away, already bored with the wound they had left behind. And still, Asante kept picking up the candy, because shame could wait, but hunger could not. Long before, Lagos hardened her face and taught her how to sleep, with one arm around her stomach and the other around a plastic bowl of sweets. Asante had belonged to a quieter place, where people still knew the sound of each other's footsteps. She came from a small town in southwestern Nigeria, a place of red earth corrugated roofs, evening cooking fires, and narrow footpaths worn smooth by generations of women, carrying water cassava babies, and sorrow in equal measure. In that town, poverty was not unusual. It sat in most homes like an uninvited relative nobody could make leave. But there was still a difference between being poor and being disgraced, and by the time Asante left, she had become both. She was the second daughter of a woman named Morenik, and a father whose silence had shaped the house more than his words ever did. Her father was not a cruel man in the loud, obvious way some men were. He did not stagger home drunk every night. He did not beat his children until the neighbors gathered. He worked when work came, spoke little, and held himself with the stiff pride of a man who had spent too many years being disappointed by life to risk tenderness. Her mother carried the greater weight of the home. She traded smoked fish and pepper in the market rows before dawn and seemed to have been born tired. There were 4 children, too many needs, too few coins, and always some emergency waiting behind the next week. Still, there had been beauty in Asante's early life, the kind of beauty that did not look like wealth, but felt like belonging. She remembered washing clothes in a basin beside her sisters and laughing when the soap slipped from their hands. She remembered the smell of rain hitting dry ground before a storm. She remembered festival days when women wrapped bright fabrics around their bodies and music traveled across the village square like a promise that joy could survive almost anything. She remembered standing before a small mirror nailed to the wall and imagining a future that would be hers, not merely inherited from hardship. Asante had good hands. Even as a girl, she could stitch a torn hem so neatly that the thread disappeared into the cloth. She watched older women sew church dresses, school uniforms, and wedding wrappers with an intensity that made them laugh and send her to fetch more light, more thread, more patience. By the time she was 17, she knew she did not want marriage as an escape, not the hurried kind that tied girls to men simply because there was no other road. She wanted a trade. She wanted skill. She wanted to stand one day in a shop of her own and say, "This was built by my hands." It was that dream that brought her to Lagos. A distant aunt knew someone who knew a woman with a tailoring shop in Mushin, and after weeks of pleading explanations and sacrifice, Asante was sent to the city as an apprentice. Her mother packed her 2 dresses, 1 wrapper, a faded Bible, and more warnings than food. In their house, hope had always traveled with fear. Her father did not hug her before she left. He only said, "Do not shame us." At the time, she thought he meant do not steal, do not become lazy, do not return home a failure. She did not understand that for many girls shame could arrive wearing the face of love. Lagos dazzled and frightened her in equal measure. The city was too loud, too fast, too full of strangers who moved as if everyone else were an obstacle. But it was also alive in a way her town had never been. There were markets that seemed endless, buses painted with impossible colors, women who wore confidence like perfume, and roads full of lives colliding every minute. The tailoring shop where she worked was small, crowded, and always hot, but she loved it. She learned quickly. She stayed late. She practiced neat seams on scraps of fabric until her fingertips hurt. Her madam, though stern, began to trust her with simple jobs. Customers noticed. For the first time, Asante could see a future beginning to take shape. That was when Kola entered her life. He was not rich, but he dressed like a man practicing for wealth. His shirts were always clean. His shoes, even when cheap, were polished. He worked as a sales assistant in an electronics store 2 streets away and had the kind of easy smile that made people believe he understood them. He started by greeting the women at the shop whenever he passed. Then he began bringing small things, sachet water, when the afternoon heat was unbearable, roasted groundnuts, once even a meat pie cut in half, because he said with a grin he had wanted to save the better part for her. At first, Asante kept her distance. City girls in the neighborhood laughed too loudly around men and seemed unafraid of heartbreak, but she had not been raised that way. She remembered her mother's warnings. She remembered her father's face. She told herself she had come to Lagos for sewing, not for foolishness. But loneliness is persuasive, especially in a city where nobody watches over your heart except you. Kola learned how to speak to her carefully. He never rushed. He asked about her village, her dreams, her work. He listened in the attentive way that made her feel visible. When she talked about owning a tailoring shop one day, he did not laugh. He told her he could already imagine the signboard, Asante Fashions. Elegant, reliable, perfect fit. She had smiled so hard that day her cheeks hurt. He said he admired that she was different from other girls, serious, decent, hard-working. He said he respected her. He said the city had too many people pretending to love, but he was not like that. He said he was building his own future, too, and one day when both of them had risen a little, they would build together. Those words settled deep inside her. Their love did not happen all at once. It grew in hidden corners of ordinary days, in shared bread after work, in evenings when they walked farther than necessary, because neither wanted to say goodbye, in the simple relief of being chosen, in a city that could make a person feel invisible. Kola became the one she called first when her feet hurt, when a customer insulted her, when she was homesick, when she wanted to laugh. He spoke of marriage, not as a distant fantasy, but as an eventual certainty. He said, "You are my wife already in my heart." He said, "When I get my promotion, we will do things properly." He said, "Trust me." She did. By the time Asante realized she had missed her monthly bleeding, fear arrived before understanding. She waited another week, then another. Her body felt strange. Her appetite shifted. A tiredness deeper than work settled into her bones. At last, she borrowed money and went to a small clinic where a nurse with impatient eyes pressed her belly, asked blunt questions, and confirmed what her heart already knew. She was pregnant. The walk back to her room felt unreal. Lagos moved around her with its usual violence, but inside her there was a silence so large it seemed to swallow sound. She was not ready, but the life was there, real, breathing through her in some mysterious beginning. Underneath the terror, another feeling trembled awake, fragile and forbidden. Wonder. Kola would help, she told herself. He had spoken of marriage too many times to turn away now. He loved her. He would be shocked, yes, but he would stand with her. He had to. When she told him, everything in his face changed. It was evening. They stood behind a row of kiosks where they had often met. The smell of fried oil hung thick in the air. She was shaking so badly she had to clasp both hands together to stop it. Kola listened without interrupting, but the warmth she knew in him drained away line by line, until he looked like a man being accused of a crime he had no intention of admitting. "Are you sure it is mine?" he asked. The question struck harder than a slap. Asante stared at him. "Kola, I'm only asking because this is Lagos," he said quickly, defensively. "Things happen. People do things." She felt something inside her break, then not loudly, not dramatically, but with the terrible softness of trust, collapsing under its own weight. "I have only been with you." He paced away, one hand on his head. "This is bad timing, very bad timing." For the next week he avoided her. Then he returned with excuses. He needed time. He was under pressure. His uncle had expectations. He would sort it out. But his voice had changed. The tenderness was gone. Soon after, she learned from another girl in the area that Kola had been seen often with the daughter of a transport union chairman, a family with money influence and ambitions larger than love. When Asante confronted him, he did not even bother to lie well. "You want me to destroy my future," he snapped. "For one mistake, one mistake," she repeated, her voice hollow. He looked away. "I cannot carry this." He stopped answering her calls after that. Desperate, humiliated, and already beginning to show, Asante called home one night from a borrowed phone. Her mother answered after many rings. At first, just hearing that familiar voice almost undid her. She tried to speak calmly. She failed. The truth came out in tears, broken pieces, shame spilling faster than she could hold it back. She told her mother everything except the darkest parts of her loneliness. She said she was afraid. She said she did not know what to do. She said she wanted to come home. On the other end, there was breathing, and then a long silence. Not the silence of a lost connection, not the silence of confusion, the silence of pain too heavy to fit into words. When Mareniki finally spoke, her voice sounded older than Asante had ever heard it. "Your father cannot hear this. Mama, you have brought a great burden. Mama, please. I have nowhere." Again silence, then quietly, almost like someone speaking from very far away. Her mother said, "Pray for God to help you." The line went dead. Asante stood in the darkness with the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to emptiness. In that moment she understood that abandonment did not always come through violence. Sometimes it came through helpless love that could not overcome fear. Sometimes it came through shame passed from one generation to the next, until it hardened into refusal. That night, Lagos became larger than ever, and Asante smaller inside it. In a city where millions struggled to be seen, Kofi Mensah had spent years mastering the art of being invisible in plain sight. Not because he lacked presence, but because he controlled it. His name carried weight in boardrooms across West Africa. His signature could move millions of dollars in a matter of hours. His companies spanning logistics, construction, and energy stood like quiet monuments to discipline, calculation, and relentless ambition. Yet outside those circles, he moved with deliberate restraint, avoiding unnecessary attention, rarely granting interviews and almost never allowing the public a glimpse into his private life. People called him disciplined. Some called him cold. A few who had worked close enough to feel the distance behind his calm eyes called him something else. Entirely a man who had once loved deeply and decided never to risk it again. Years before Lagos became his second home, before his company expanded beyond Ghana's borders, Kofi had been a different man. Younger, less guarded, more willing to believe that life could be shaped not only by strategy, but by joy. In those days, his world had revolved around a woman named Abena, sharp-minded, warm-hearted, and unafraid to challenge him in ways no business rival ever could. She had not been impressed by his ambition at first. "You think success is only numbers," she once told him, leaning across a small cafe table. "But success is also who you become while chasing those numbers." He had laughed then, not because he disagreed, but because no one had ever spoken to him like that before. They married quietly, without the spectacle his growing wealth could have afforded. Abena preferred simplicity, and Kofi, though already rising, discovered that the simplest things with her felt richer than anything money could purchase. They built a life together in Accra first, then gradually expanded their world as his business grew. When she became pregnant, it felt less like a new chapter and more like a continuation of something already whole. Then in a single night, everything broke. It was supposed to be routine. A late return from a meeting, a quiet drive home. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, blurring the road into streaks of light and shadow. Kofi remembered the way Abena had rested her hand over her belly, smiling faintly as she spoke about names, about colors for the baby's room, about small futures that now seemed impossibly large. He also remembered the sound. Metal against metal, a sudden impact, the violent, disorienting force that turned certainty into chaos. A truck driver, drunk and speeding through the rain, lost control at an intersection. Kofi survived. Abena did not. Neither did the child. In the months that followed, grief did not come as a single overwhelming wave. It came in fragments, quiet, persistent, unrelenting. It sat beside him in empty rooms. It followed him into meetings. It hollowed out laughter before it could form. People offered condolences, prayers, space. Some advised him to remarry quickly, as if love could be replaced the way furniture could be rearranged after a loss. Others told him time would heal, not understanding that time sometimes only teaches a person how to carry pain more efficiently. Kofi chose work. He expanded his company. He entered new markets. He built structures that would outlast him. He surrounded himself with capable people and clear systems. He controlled what he could control. And for a long time, that was enough to keep the deeper parts of his grief contained like water, held behind a carefully constructed dam. But some memories did not fade. They waited. Years later in Lagos, on a morning that should have been like any other, something shifted. Kofi was not supposed to be at that junction. His driver had suggested an alternative route to avoid traffic near a construction site owned by one of their competitors. But Kofi, reviewing documents in the back seat, had barely looked up when he said, "No, stay on this road." It was a small decision, insignificant at the time, the kind that rarely carried meaning, until it did. The car slowed as it approached the traffic light. Outside, the usual chaos unfolded, hawkers weaving between vehicles, horns cutting through the air, pedestrians navigating narrow gaps between impatience and necessity. Kofi's attention drifted from the papers in his hand to the movement outside, not with curiosity but with the habitual awareness of a man who observed everything without appearing to. That was when he saw her. At first, she was just another figure among many, a young woman moving carefully between cars holding a shallow bowl. Then she turned slightly, and something about the way she placed her hand over her belly caught his eye. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just a small instinctive gesture of protection. Pregnant. He watched her for a few seconds longer than necessary. She approached a car ahead, spoke softly, then moved on when the driver ignored her. There was no aggression in her posture, no desperation in her voice from what he could see, only a quiet persistence that felt strangely out of place in such a harsh environment. "Sir," his driver said, glancing in the rearview mirror, "the light will change soon." Kofi did not answer immediately. The girl Asante, though he did not know her name, yet moved closer to his car. For a brief moment, their worlds aligned. She lifted the bowl slightly, not pleading, simply offering, "Candy, sir." Her voice did not reach him through the closed window, but he could see the shape of the words. He could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the careful way she held herself, as if any sudden movement might break something inside her. And then, almost without warning, something else surfaced. A memory. Abena, years ago, standing in their kitchen, one hand resting over her belly in that same unconscious way. The quiet confidence in that gesture. The unspoken bond between a mother and a child, not yet born. The resemblance was not physical. It was something deeper, more difficult to explain. A posture, a presence, a fragile strength. Kofi's chest tightened. He looked away. The light turned green. The car moved forward. The moment should have ended there, absorbed into the countless images that passed unnoticed through his days. But it did not. For the rest of that morning, during meetings, presentations, negotiations, the image returned uninvited. The girl at the traffic light. The way she stood. The quietness in her movements. The absence of bitterness in her expression, despite everything that surrounded her. It irritated him. Not because it was unpleasant, but because it disrupted a balance he had spent years maintaining. He had learned to separate himself from the chaos of the world outside his controlled environments. Compassion, he believed, should be structured, organized, directed through foundations and policies, not triggered by individual encounters that could not be rationally managed. And yet, the image remained. By midday, he found himself asking a question he rarely allowed. Who is she? He dismissed it at first. It was not his concern. Lagos was full of stories like hers. If he stopped for everyone, he would never move forward. That was the logic he had built his life on. But logic did not silence the memory. Later that afternoon, as his car passed through a different part of the city, Kofi looked out again, almost unconsciously scanning the roadside. He did not see her. Instead, he saw others, children weaving through traffic with trays of goods too heavy for their thin arms, women carrying babies while selling water, men with tired eyes offering services nobody seemed to need. Lives balanced on the edge of survival, visible yet ignored. For a moment, something unsettled him. He thought of Abena again, of the life they had planned, of the child who never had the chance to stand in any street, rich or poor, to ask for anything at all. That evening, as the sun dipped low and Lagos shifted into its restless night rhythm, Kofi made a decision that surprised even him. "Find her," he said to Tariq. His assistant looked up from his tablet. "Sir, the pregnant girl, at the traffic junction this morning." Tariq hesitated. "There are many, this one." Kofi interrupted his tone, calm but final. "You will recognize her when you see her." There was a brief pause. Tariq nodded. "Yes, sir." Kofi leaned back in his seat, his gaze returning to the window. He did not yet know why he had given the order, but somewhere beneath the layers of controlled discipline and carefully constructed distance, something had already begun to move. Something he had not felt in years, and once awakened, it would not easily return to silence. By the time the sun began to lean westward and the harsh brightness of Lagos softened into a dusty gold, Asante's knees were still burning from where they had touched the road, and her fingers were coated with a thin film of grime she could not fully wipe away. The candy she had managed to salvage lay unevenly in her bowl. Some packets crushed, others stained, all of them harder to sell now that they had touched the ground. But she stood again, because standing was the only way forward. The world had not paused for her humiliation. Cars continued to move, traders continued to shout, children continued to laugh. Somewhere, a radio played a high-life song that spoke of love and celebration, as though such things were evenly distributed across the city. Asante adjusted the strap of her worn sandals and stepped back toward the edge of the traffic, lifting the bowl once more. "Candy, sir. Candy, madam." Her voice was softer now, not because she had lost strength, but because something inside her had folded inward. She no longer expected kindness. She only hoped for transactions. A woman in a bright head wrap glanced at the sweets and frowned. "Why are they dirty like this?" Asante swallowed. "They fell, madam, but they are still sealed." The woman shook her head and turned away. Another man waved her off impatiently. A bus conductor laughed and mimicked her posture, one hand on his stomach, exaggerating her condition to entertain his passengers. Even a group of schoolgirls no older than 14 whispered and giggled behind their palms as they passed her. Asante felt the familiar tightening in her chest, but she did not stop. She moved from car to car, from face to face, offering what little she had left. A few people bought out of convenience. One man tossed coins into her bowl without taking anything, then drove off before she could thank him. It was not generosity, she knew. It was the kind of giving that relieved the giver more than it helped the receiver. Still, coins were coins. They meant food. They meant survival. By late afternoon, her legs had begun to tremble. The earlier pain in her lower abdomen returned sharper, now more insistent. It came in waves, forcing her to pause between cars and press her palm against her belly as though she could steady whatever was shifting inside. Sweat gathered along her hairline and slid down her neck. The air felt thicker. The sounds around her blurred slightly at the edges. "Not now," she whispered again, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Please, just a little more time." She moved away from the main road and found a narrow strip of shade beside a wooden stall that sold fried plantain. The oil sizzled loudly in a shallow pan, and the smell was both comforting and torturous. Her stomach clenched in response. She had not eaten since the previous night. The woman behind the stall glanced at her briefly, then returned to her work. This was Lagos. People saw everything and chose what to respond to. Asante lowered herself carefully onto an overturned crate, placing the bowl on her lap. For a moment, she allowed her shoulders to drop. The world did not end when she rested. It simply moved on without her. She counted her coins. Not enough. Even if she stretched it carefully, it would not cover both food and a place to sleep. The realization settled heavily in her chest. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, then opened them again. There was no room for despair, only decisions. Take water first, she told herself. Then think. She pushed herself up and crossed the road, slowly waiting for a break in traffic. On the other side, a young boy stood with a bucket of sachet water, balanced against his hip, calling out to passing drivers. Water. Cold water. Asante approached him. One, she said, holding out a coin. The boy looked at her, then at her belly, then back at her face. He handed her a sachet without speaking. "Thank you," she said. She bit off the corner and drank carefully, letting the cool liquid settle inside her. It did not fill the emptiness, but it softened it enough for her to think. When she finished, she tied the empty plastic into a knot and slipped it into her pocket. Even trash had its place. Somewhere someone would collect it and sell it again. In Lagos, nothing truly went to waste except sometimes people. She turned back toward the stall, intending to move again when she noticed a small figure sitting near the edge of the walkway. It was a boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. His clothes too thin for his body, his eyes too large for his face. He held nothing in his hands. He was not selling. He was not calling out. He was simply sitting watching the world move past him, with a quiet stillness that felt older than his years. Asante hesitated. She knew that look. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting anything from anyone. She glanced down at her bowl. The remaining sweets were few, each one a small piece of potential survival. Every packet mattered. Every coin it could bring mattered more. The boy shifted slightly, drawing his knees closer to his chest. His gaze flickered toward her, then away again as if he had already decided she would not stop. Asante took a step toward him, then another. She crouched slowly, ignoring the protest in her legs, and held out one of the least damaged packets. "Take," she said gently. The boy blinked, surprised. "For me." She nodded. He reached out cautiously, as though afraid the offer might be withdrawn at the last moment. When his fingers closed around the sweet, something softened in his face. Not a full smile. Not yet. But the beginning of one. "Thank you," he whispered. Asante nodded again, then stood, her body heavier now, but her chest strangely lighter. She had given away what she could barely afford to lose, and yet for a brief moment she felt less empty. Behind her, the woman at the plantain stall watched the exchange. "Come here," the woman called after a pause. Asante turned. The woman gestured toward a small plate set aside near the edge of the stall. On it were a few pieces of plantain, darker than the fresh ones she was selling, but still warm. "Eat," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind, "before you fall down on my roadside." Asante hesitated, pride and need wrestling inside her. "Go on," the woman added, already turning back to her pan. I did not say it twice. Asante stepped forward slowly. "Thank you, Ma." She picked up the plate with trembling hands and ate carefully, savoring each bite as though it were something rare and precious. The sweetness of the plantain spread through her, easing the sharp edges of hunger. For a moment, the world felt manageable again. When she finished, she returned the plate. "Thank you." The woman waved her off. "Just be careful," she said. "This road does not forgive." Asante nodded. She stepped back into the flow of the street, lifting her bowl once more. Evening approached, and with it came a different kind of energy. Workers returned home. Traffic thickened. The air cooled slightly, though the city remained restless. Lights flickered on in shops and along the roadside, casting uneven shadows across the pavement. Asante moved through it all quieter now, more deliberate. She sold 2 more packets. Then 1. Each small success felt like a step across a narrow bridge suspended over uncertainty. But the pain returned again, stronger this time. She stopped near the edge of the road, gripping the side of a parked vehicle as the wave passed through her. Her breath came shallow. Her vision dimmed slightly at the edges. "Just a little more," she whispered. "Just a little more." She straightened slowly, forcing her body to obey. She did not know that somewhere across the city, a man who had built his life on control had begun to look for her. She did not know that the moment she had just lived, kneeling on the road, gathering scattered sweets, giving one away, when she could not afford it, had already been seen. And she did not know that the fragile balance she was struggling to maintain was about to be broken in a way that would change everything. For now, there was only the road, only the fading light, only the quiet, stubborn rhythm of survival. And Asante still standing in the middle of it all, while Asante moved through the fading light with a bowl that had grown lighter and a body that had grown heavier. Kofi Mensah sat in a quiet office, high above the city where glass walls framed Lagos as something distant, almost abstract. From that height, the traffic became patterns, the people became motion, and the noise reduced itself to a muted hum that could be ignored at will. It was a perspective he had earned, built, and protected. Up there, chaos looked manageable. But that afternoon, it did not feel that way. Kofi stood near the window, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, watching the slow crawl of vehicles below. The documents on his desk remained untouched. His mind had returned again and again to the same image. The pregnant girl, the traffic light, the small instinctive way her hand had rested over her stomach. He had given Tariq a simple instruction: find her. Now he waited. A soft knock broke the stillness. "Come in," Kofi said without turning. Tariq entered, tablet in hand, posture straight, expression controlled. He had worked with Kofi long enough to recognize when a task, though outwardly minor, carried unusual weight. "I have preliminary information, sir," he said. Kofi turned slightly, not fully facing him. "Go on." "The girl is called Asante," Tariq began. "No confirmed surname yet. She appears to have arrived in Lagos within the last year, possibly from a rural area in the southwest. No formal employment records. She sells small goods at traffic intersections, mostly sweets." Kofi's gaze shifted, focusing now. "Continue." "She's approximately 6 to 7 months pregnant. No known spouse. According to local sources, she was previously attached to a man named Kola, a sales assistant in an electronics shop. He is now engaged to the daughter of a transport union official." A brief pause. "He denies any responsibility." Kofi's expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. "And her family?" he asked. "Contact appears minimal," Tariq replied. "There was a call made to a number registered in a rural area, but no ongoing support. It is likely she has been distanced." The word hung carefully in the air, chosen to soften a harsher truth. "Where is she now?" Kofi asked. "Still operating around the same junction for most of the day," Tariq said. "However, her location varies slightly depending on traffic flow and enforcement presence. She does not appear to have a fixed place of residence. She sleeps in different areas: shop fronts, roadside stalls, temporary shelters." Kofi turned fully now, his gaze steady. "Has she been approached by any organization, charity, clinic, outreach program?" "Not in any consistent way," Tariq answered. "There are occasional interactions, food vendors, small acts of assistance, but nothing structured." Kofi nodded slowly. Silence settled between them, for a moment, not empty but filled with unspoken considerations. Tariq had seen this before. When Kofi became still like this, it meant he was weighing something beyond numbers. Sir Tariq said carefully, "If I may." Kofi lifted a hand, slightly signaling him to continue. "This situation carries risk," Tariq said. "Public perception, media attention, potential legal complications if there are claims regarding the child. If you involve yourself directly, it may be interpreted in ways we cannot fully control." Kofi's gaze remained on him. "You are advising against involvement," he said. "I am advising caution," Tariq replied. Another pause. Kofi turned back toward the window. "Caution is useful," he said quietly, "but it is not always sufficient." Tariq did not respond. He understood that tone. The decision had already begun to form. Down on the street, unseen from that height, lives continued to unfold without knowledge of the conversation taking place above them. Among those lives, Asante still moved, still endured, still held herself together by a thread that had grown dangerously thin. Kofi spoke again. "Have you observed her directly?" "Yes, Sir," Tariq said. "Earlier today, and she does not beg," Tariq replied after a brief hesitation. "She sells, even when ignored, even when treated poorly." Kofi's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Tariq glanced down at his tablet, though he did not need to. "There was an incident," he said. "A group of young men disrupted her. They caused her goods to fall onto the road. She retrieved what she could and continued working." Kofi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and her reaction. "No confrontation," Tariq said. "No escalation. She absorbed it." The word lingered. Kofi exhaled slowly, and after Tariq hesitated for the first time. "She gave away one of her remaining sweets," he said. Kofi turned his head. "To whom a child, younger than her circumstances, would justify helping." Kofi said nothing, but something shifted again. It was not the suffering that unsettled him. He had seen suffering before. He had built systems designed to address it at scale, efficiently, strategically. It was the choice within the suffering that disturbed the balance he had maintained. She had almost nothing, and she had still given something away. That did not fit into the frameworks he trusted. "Where is she now?" Kofi asked again. "Still near the junction," Tariq said, "though her condition appears unstable. There are signs of physical strain." Kofi's gaze sharpened. "What kind of strain?" "Fatigue, possible abdominal discomfort, limited food intake," Tariq replied. "She is continuing to work despite it." Kofi looked back out at the city. For a moment he saw not buildings, not roads, not opportunity, but a single fragile point moving within. It all unprotected, unrecognized, carrying a life that had not asked to begin under such conditions. He remembered Abena again, the way she had laughed when he worried too much, the way she had said, "You cannot control everything, Kofi. Sometimes you just have to show up." He had not been able to show up that night. The memory struck deeper than he expected. Behind him, Tariq remained still waiting. Kofi spoke without turning. "If we do nothing," he said, "what happens?" Tariq did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was measured. "She continues as she is," he said. "Until she cannot." Kofi closed his eyes briefly. The room felt smaller. "Prepare a vehicle," he said. Tariq blinked. "Sir, I will go," Kofi said. A beat of silence. "Personally, yes." Tariq stepped forward slightly. "Sir, it would be more efficient to send." "No," Kofi interrupted, his tone still calm but final. "This requires direct assessment." Tariq understood. The decision was no longer theoretical. "Yes, sir," he said. He turned to leave, then paused. "Shall I arrange security?" he asked. Kofi considered for a moment. "Minimal," he said. "No attention." Tariq nodded and exited. Kofi remained by the window a moment longer. He was aware, fully aware, that this was not a calculated business move. It did not align with his usual methods. It introduced variables he could not easily control. It carried the possibility of complication, misunderstanding, even scandal. And yet, standing there, he realized something else. Control had not saved Abena. Distance had not protected him from loss. Perhaps he thought not everything that mattered could be managed from behind glass. Down below, the city continued its restless motion. And somewhere within it, Asante stood again at the edge of the road, holding what little remained of her day. Kofi turned away from the window. For the first time in a long while, he was not moving toward a deal, a contract, or an expansion. He was moving toward a person, and though he did not yet understand why, he knew this choice would not leave him unchanged. By the time the evening traffic thickened into long, restless lines of red brake lights and impatient horns, Asante's body had begun to move on instinct more than strength. She no longer counted how many packets she had left. She no longer tried to calculate how much she needed. Her world had narrowed into something simpler and more urgent: stand, step forward, offer, endure, breathe. The sky above Lagos dimmed slowly, the gold of sunset fading into a smoky blue that blurred the edges of buildings and people alike. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting uneven pools of light across the road. In those spaces between brightness and shadow, faces became harder to read, and voices seemed to travel differently, sharper, closer, more intrusive. Asante shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the pressure in her lower back. The pain had not left her since afternoon. It came and went like a warning she could not fully understand. Each time it returned, she paused, pressed her hand against her belly, and whispered the same quiet plea. Just a little more. A car slowed near her. She stepped forward, automatically lifting the bowl. Candy, sir. The window remained closed. The driver looked straight ahead. She stepped back. Another car, another attempt, another dismissal. The rhythm continued. Then, without warning, something changed. It was not the traffic, not the light, not the noise. It was a presence, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A different kind of attention, in the air, as though someone nearby was observing, not out of curiosity but with intention. Asante felt it before she saw it. She turned slightly. A black SUV had stopped at the edge of the junction, not quite in line with the others, its engine running quietly. The windows were tinted, but the rear door opened before she could look away. A man stepped out. He did not move like the others who passed through this place. There was no rush in his steps, no visible irritation at the chaos around him. His clothes were simple but unmistakably expensive. His posture carried a kind of quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. Even in the dim light, there was something controlled about him, something composed. Asante's first instinct was to step back. Men who stood out like that did not come down to the road for no reason. He walked toward her. Not fast, not slow, direct. People nearby noticed. A few heads turned. A vendor paused mid-sentence. A driver leaned slightly out of his window to watch. Lagos had a way of sensing when something unusual was about to unfold. Asante tightened her grip on the bowl. Candy, sir, she said automatically, though her voice lacked its earlier steadiness. The man stopped a few steps away from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, his face was calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes were not indifferent. They studied her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with a focus that made her uneasy. You are Asante, he said. It was not a question. Her heart skipped. Yes, she replied cautiously. He nodded once, as though confirming something already known. My name is Kofi Mensah. The name meant nothing to her in that moment. It was just another name in a city full of names that did not change her reality. She shifted slightly. Do you want candy, sir? A faint pause. No, he said. The answer landed strangely between them. Asante lowered the bowl a little. "Then I want to speak with you," he continued. The words tightened something inside her. About what she asked, her voice guarded now. Kofi glanced briefly at the traffic, then back at her. "Not here." Asante's body stiffened. "No," she said quickly. "I cannot go anywhere." A few people nearby leaned in, pretending not to listen. Kofi seemed to consider her response, then adjusted his approach. "You are not safe here," he said. Asante almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. "I have been here," she replied. "I am fine." Kofi's gaze shifted briefly to her hands, to the way her fingers trembled slightly around the bowl, then to the faint strain in her posture. "You are not fine," he said quietly. The simplicity of the statement unsettled her more than anything else he had said. "I am working," she insisted. "At what cost?" he asked. The question struck deeper than she expected. She straightened, lifting her chin slightly. "I did not ask for help," I know Kofi said. Another pause. The traffic light changed again. Cars moved. The moment stretched, suspended between them. Asante glanced around. People were watching now, though pretending not to. She felt exposed, as though this conversation itself was something fragile that could be broken by too many eyes. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Kofi held her gaze. "I want to offer you a place," he said. Her expression hardened immediately. "I do not need a place to stay," he continued, his tone still even. "Safe, clean, with medical care." The words landed heavily. Asante shook her head. "No. You have not heard I said no." She repeated more firmly now. A flicker of something surprise perhaps passed through Kofi's eyes, but it vanished quickly. "Why?" he asked. Asante took a step back. "Because I do not know you," she said. "Because people do not just come from cars like that and offer things for nothing. Because I have learned not to follow strangers, no matter how they speak." Her voice did not rise, but it carried weight. Kofi listened. "That is reasonable," he said. The response caught her off guard. "I am not asking you to trust me immediately," he added. "I am asking you to consider what happens if you continue like this." "I will continue," she said. "For how long?" he asked. The pain in her abdomen chose that moment to return. Sharp, sudden, she inhaled sharply, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Kofi noticed. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "It is nothing," she replied quickly, though her voice betrayed her. He took a small step forward. Asante stepped back again, fear rising, now mixing with pride, with exhaustion, with something she could not name. "Do not come closer," she said. Kofi stopped immediately. The restraint mattered. They stood like that for a moment. Distance held between them like an agreement neither had spoken aloud. Finally, Kofi spoke again. "I will not force you," he said, "but I will be clear." Asante said nothing. "If you remain here," he continued, "your situation will worsen. Not slowly, quickly. Your health is already affected. The child—" "Do not talk about my child," she interrupted, sharper than before. Another pause. Kofi inclined his head slightly. "Very well." He reached into his pocket, then stopped as though reconsidering. Slowly, deliberately, he took out a small card and placed it on the edge of her bowl, instead of handing it directly to her. "There is an address," he said, "and a number." Asante stared at the card, but did not touch it. "If you decide," he continued, "you can come, or call." She lifted her eyes to his again. "And if I do not?" Kofi held her gaze. "Then I will respect that," he said. There was no threat in his voice, no pressure, just a statement. That somehow made it more difficult. The noise of the street returned around them as though the moment had been briefly muted and was now released back into motion. A horn blared. Someone shouted. A bus lurched forward. Kofi stepped back. "I will not approach you again without your permission," he said. Then he turned. Asante watched him walk back toward the SUV, her mind racing, her body still trembling from pain, and something deeper, something unsettled. The door closed. The vehicle moved. Within seconds, it blended back into the flow of traffic, leaving no visible trace of its presence. But the card remained, resting lightly against the edge of her bowl. Asante stood still for a long moment, staring at it. Around her, Lagos continued as if nothing had happened. But something had, and though she did not yet understand it, the balance of her world had just shifted. For a long time after the black SUV disappeared into the restless current of Lagos traffic, Asante did not move. The card remained where Kofi had placed it, resting lightly against the rim of her plastic bowl, as if it carried no weight at all. Yet to her it felt heavier than anything she had held that day. She stared at it without touching it. Around her, life continued with its usual urgency. Drivers shouted, conductors slapped the sides of buses. A woman argued loudly over the price of tomatoes. Somewhere behind her, a generator sputtered to life. But all of it seemed distant now, as though she were standing slightly outside the world she had been struggling inside only moments ago. A place to stay, safe, clean, medical care. The words echoed in her mind, not as comfort, but as questions. Why her? What did he really want? What kind of man stepped out of a car like that and offered help without asking for anything in return? She had learned, painfully and thoroughly, that nothing in Lagos came without a cost. Slowly, she reached out and picked up the card. Her fingers hesitated just before touching it, as if contact itself might commit her to something she could not undo. Then she lifted it. It was simple. Thick paper, a name, a number, an address. No explanations, no promises written down. She turned it over, blank. Of course, she murmured to herself. A laugh rose in her chest, but it did not reach her lips. She slipped the card into the fold of her dress, close enough that she could feel its edge against her skin. Not because she trusted it, but because she could not bring herself to throw it away. The pain in her abdomen returned sharper now. She bent slightly, pressing her hand against her belly, breathing through it. The wave passed more slowly this time, leaving behind a dull ache that did not fully fade. "You are strong," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to herself or to the child. "We will manage." She straightened again. The sky had darkened further. Night was settling in, bringing with it a different kind of danger. The roads did not empty, they transformed. Faces changed, voices deepened, movements became less predictable, more guarded. Asante knew she should find a place to rest soon. But she also knew she did not have enough. She looked down at her bowl. Only a few packets remained. Not enough to change anything. Not enough to secure even a temporary corner to sleep in. She exhaled slowly. Just a little more, she told herself again. She stepped back toward the traffic. The hours that followed blurred together. She sold one more packet, then another. A man bought two without speaking. A woman haggled over a price that was already too low. Each interaction felt smaller than the effort it required. By the time her bowl was nearly empty, her body had reached its limit. She moved away from the road, her steps slower now, less steady. The lights from nearby shops cast uneven shadows across the pavement. Music drifted from a bar somewhere down the street, mixed with laughter that felt distant and unreal. She found a narrow space beside a closed storefront and lowered herself carefully to the ground. For a moment she simply sat. Her breathing was shallow, her hands rested on her knees. The world tilted slightly, then steadied. "You need to rest," she whispered. But rest required safety, and safety required money. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, someone was standing in front of her. She looked up. Her heart dropped. Kola. He stood there with the same posture she remembered, casual, self-assured, but something in his expression had changed. There was no warmth, no familiarity, only irritation, as though her presence itself inconvenienced him. "Asante," he said. She did not respond immediately. He glanced around quickly as if checking who might be watching, then stepped closer. "I have been looking for you," he said. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. Kola exhaled sharply. "Do not start like that." She held his gaze. "Then how should I start?" He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I heard you are still around here," he said. "Still doing this." He gestured vaguely toward her bowl, her body, her situation. Asante's fingers tightened slightly. "I am surviving," she said. Kola scoffed. "That is what you call it." She said nothing. He ran a hand over his face, then lowered his voice. "Listen," he said. "You need to stop showing yourself like this." The words did not make sense at first. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean this," he said, gesturing again more sharply now, standing on the road, letting people see you. "It is not good." "For who?" she asked. "For me," he snapped, then immediately lowered his tone again. "For both of us." Something inside Asante went very still. "There is no us," she said. Kola ignored that. "My fiancé's family is important," he continued. "People talk, they see things. If they connect you to me, to you," she repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. "You already disconnected yourself." Kola's jaw tightened. "That is not the point," he said. "The point is you need to leave this area." Asante stared at him. "I need to leave," she said slowly. "Yes," he replied. "Go somewhere else, anywhere, just not here." A bitter laugh escaped her, then soft but unmistakable. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked. Kola's expression hardened. "I am trying to help you," he said. "No," Asante replied. "You are trying to hide yourself." A flicker of anger crossed his face. "You think this is a joke," he said. "Do you know what I have worked for? Do you know what is at stake? And do you know what I have lost?" she asked quietly. The question hung between them. Kola looked away for a moment, then back. "This is your situation," he said. "You made your choices." Asante felt the words settle into her chest like stones. "My choices," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "Do not try to put this on me." For a second she could not speak. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said. "I will not put it on you." Relief flickered across his face too quickly. "But do not put it on me either," she added. The relief vanished. Kola stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "Listen carefully," he said. "If this affects my engagement, I will not be responsible for what happens next." The threat was quiet, clear, real. Asante looked at him. Truly, looked at him as though seeing him for the first time. This was the man she had trusted, the man she had believed, the man who had once spoken of building a future together. Something inside her closed. "You are already not responsible," she said. Kola's expression darkened. "You are making a mistake," he said. "No," Asante replied. "I already made one." Silence stretched between them. Then Kola stepped back. "Just disappear," he said. "That is all I am asking." He turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Asante watched him go. This time she did not call after him. She did not cry. She did not move. For a long moment she simply sat there, the weight of everything pressing down on her: hunger, pain, exhaustion, betrayal. And beneath it all, something else. A decision forming, slow, uncertain, but real. Her hand moved instinctively to her dress, to the place where the card rested against her skin. She felt its edge, closed her eyes, then opened them again. The night stretched ahead of her, long and unforgiving, But for the first time since the man in the black SUV had stepped into her world, there was another possibility, fragile, unclear, and dangerous in its own way. Asante did not yet know which path she would choose, only that the choice was no longer simple, and whatever she decided next would change everything. Night settled fully over Lagos, not with silence but with a different kind of noise, deeper, sharper, less forgiving. The rhythm of the city did not slow. It shifted. Headlights stretched into long, restless lines. Music spilled from bars and roadside speakers. Voices carried further in the dark laughter, mixing with arguments, deals, and warnings whispered, just low enough to be denied. Asante remained where she was, for longer than she realized. Kola's words lingered, not because they surprised her, but because they confirmed something she had tried, even in pain, not to accept completely. There would be no return, no apology, no sudden moment where he would remember who she was to him, before fear and ambition replaced whatever he had once called love. She was alone. The truth did not arrive with drama. It settled quietly, like dust after movement, leaving everything slightly heavier than before. Her hand moved again to the fold of her dress. The card. She pulled it out slowly and looked at it under the dim light spilling from a nearby shop. The ink was clean, the letters precise, the address clear enough even to someone unfamiliar with the area it described. It pointed to a part of the city she had never entered, a place where roads were smoother, buildings taller, and people moved differently. A place that did not belong to her. Yet, she turned the card over once more as if expecting something new to appear. Nothing did. "Why me?" she whispered. There was no answer. The pain in her abdomen returned again, stronger than before. It forced her to lean forward, both hands gripping her belly now. Her breath came unevenly, her body tightening around the discomfort. "This is not time," she said under her breath, panic threading through her voice. "Not yet. Please." The wave passed, but slower this time, leaving behind a fear she could no longer ignore. She could not continue like this. Not for another week, not even for another day. Asante looked around. The street that had felt familiar now seemed uncertain, even threatening. Shadows moved where she could not clearly see faces. A group of men laughed loudly near a bar, their voices edged with something unpredictable. A woman hurried past with a child strapped to her back, her eyes fixed forward, unwilling to engage with anything around her. Survival here required more than endurance. It required timing, and hers was running out. Slowly, carefully, Asante pushed herself up from the ground. Her legs trembled. She steadied herself against the wall behind her and waited until the dizziness passed. The world tilted slightly, then returned to balance. She looked down at the nearly empty bowl in her hand. This was not enough anymore. It had never truly been enough. But now it was dangerous. Her gaze shifted back to the card, the address, the number, the unknown. Fear rose again, sharp and immediate. What if it was a trap? What if the man Kofi was not what he appeared? What if she walked into something she could not escape? Her mind filled with warnings, stories she had heard, girls who trusted the wrong person, women who disappeared into promises that turned into prisons. She closed her eyes briefly. Then another thought pushed through. What if she did nothing? What if she stayed? What if the next pain did not pass? What if she collapsed somewhere no one cared enough to notice? What if her child? She opened her eyes quickly. "No," she said out loud, more firmly now. The word felt like a boundary. Not against fear, but against paralysis. She looked down at the card again. "I will go," she said quietly. "But I will not be foolish." It was the closest thing she had to a plan. She moved toward the main road, her steps slow but deliberate. The night traffic was still heavy but less chaotic than before. She raised her hand slightly, signaling to passing drivers. The first car sped past. The second ignored her. The third slowed. A yellow taxi. The driver leaned slightly out of his window, studying her. "Where are you going?" he asked. Asante hesitated for only a second. She read the address from the card. The driver raised his eyebrows. "That place," he said. "Yes." He looked her over again, taking in her condition, her clothes, her exhaustion. "It is not near," he said. "I know. Do you have money?" Asante opened her hand, revealing the coins she had left. The driver frowned. "This will not reach," he said. "I can add when we get there," she replied quickly. "I will pay. Please." He hesitated. Behind him, another car honked impatiently. The driver sighed. "Enter," he said finally. "But if there is problem, there will not be," she said. She opened the door carefully and eased herself into the back seat, holding her belly as she moved. The seat felt softer than anything she had touched all day. For a moment, the simple act of sitting without pressure on her legs felt like relief she had almost forgotten existed. The taxi pulled into traffic. As they moved through the city, the familiar streets began to change. The crowded markets thinned. The noise softened. Buildings grew taller, cleaner. Streetlights became more consistent. The air itself seemed different, less heavy, less chaotic. Asante watched through the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She looked out of place. She knew it. Her hand rested over her belly again. "We are going somewhere new," she whispered. The baby shifted slightly as if responding. Tears rose in her eyes, unexpected. Not from sadness, not entirely. From the weight of the moment. From the uncertainty. From the fragile possibility that something might change. The taxi slowed as they approached a gated entrance. Tall walls, security lights, uniformed guards. The kind of place she had only ever seen from a distance. The driver stopped. "This is the address," he said. Asante looked up at the gate. Her heart began to race. This was real, too real. She reached for the door, then paused. What if this was a mistake? What if she turned back now? What if another wave of pain cut through her thoughts? Stronger, more urgent. Her breath caught. Decision was no longer optional. She opened the door, stepped out. The night air felt different here, cooler, quieter, almost unreal. One of the guards approached. "Who are you?" he asked. Asante swallowed. She held up the card. I was told to come," she said. The guard took the card, glanced at it, then looked at her again, longer this time. Something in his expression shifted. He spoke briefly into a radio, then nodded. "You may enter," he said. The gate began to open, slowly, silently. Asante stood there watching it move, feeling as though she were standing at the edge of something she did not fully understand. Behind her was everything she knew: pain, hunger, humiliation. Ahead of her was something else. Unknown, uncertain, possibly dangerous, possibly life-changing. She took a step forward, then another, and crossed the threshold, without knowing that inside the man who had set all of this in motion was already waiting, and that the offer he was about to make would change not only her life, but his as well. The gate closed behind Asante with a quiet finality that felt louder than any noise she had left outside. For a moment she stood still, just inside the compound, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. The air here was different, cooler, cleaner, almost too calm. The ground beneath her feet was smooth, even nothing like the broken pavement she had grown used to navigating. Lights lined the pathway ahead, casting a steady glow that did not flicker or strain. It did not feel like Lagos, or at least not the Lagos she knew. A second guard approached, his posture formal but not aggressive. He had already been informed. "Follow me," he said. Asante hesitated, then nodded. Her steps were slow as she walked behind him, her eyes moving quickly, taking in everything: the trimmed hedges, the quiet buildings, the absence of shouting, of chaos, of survival. Each detail felt unreal, like stepping into a place that existed only for other people. They stopped in front of a modest but elegant building, not extravagant, not excessive, but clearly designed with intention. "Wait here," the guard said. He stepped inside. Asante remained where she was, her hands instinctively resting on her belly. The pain had not left her, but it had softened slightly, as though her body, too, was unsure how to react to this sudden change in environment. A door opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her early 40s, composed, well-dressed, her posture straight, and her gaze sharp, but not unkind. Her name, though Asante did not know it, yet was Zainab. She looked Asante over in a single assessing glance. "You came," Zainab said. It was not a greeting. It was an observation. Asante nodded slightly. "I was told," "Yes," Zainab interrupted gently. "I know." She stepped aside. "Come." Asante followed her inside. The difference was immediate. The floor was clean enough to reflect light. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something softer, lavender perhaps. The walls were painted in calm colors. There were chairs arranged neatly along one side, a desk at the far end, and a quietness that felt almost sacred compared to the noise outside. Asante's footsteps slowed. She felt exposed. Every stain on her dress, every trace of dust on her skin, every sign of the road clung to her in this space where nothing seemed out of place. Zainab noticed. "There is no need to be uncomfortable," she said, though her tone remained measured. "You are not the first to come here." Asante nodded again, unsure what to say. "Sit," Zainab added, gesturing toward a chair. Asante lowered herself carefully, her body grateful for the support. The moment she sat, she felt the weight of the day settle into her bones. Zainab observed her for a moment, then spoke. "You are Asante." "Yes, and you were given an invitation." Asante reached into her dress and held out the card. Zainab did not take it. "I am aware," she said. A brief silence followed. Then Zainab's gaze softened just slightly. "You need medical attention first," she said. "Not conversation." Asante's instinct was to protest. "I am fine. You are not," Zainab replied calmly. The certainty in her voice left little room for argument. Zainab turned toward a nearby door. "Doctor," she called. Moments later, a man in a white coat entered, his expression professional but attentive. He approached Asante slowly. "My name is Dr. Bello," he said. "May I?" He gestured gently toward her. Asante hesitated, then nodded. The examination was careful, respectful, and thorough. Dr. Bello asked questions in a calm voice, explaining each step as he went. Asante answered as best as she could, though some details felt too personal to share easily. When he finished, he stepped back. "You are dehydrated," he said, "exhausted, and your body is under strain." Asante looked down. "The baby?" she asked quietly. Dr. Bello paused. "For now stable," he said. "But you cannot continue as you have been." The words settled heavily. Zainab stepped forward again. "We will take care of that," she said. Asante looked up. Why, she asked. The question was simple, direct, unavoidable. Zainab held her gaze for a moment, then answered carefully. "Because you were brought here," she said, "and because that decision was not made lightly." Asante's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the chair. "By him," she said. Zainab nodded once. "He is here," she added. Asante's breath caught. "Now, yes." A pause. "You will speak with him," Zainab said. "But not yet. First you will rest." Asante shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I want to understand." Zainab studied her. "You will," she replied. But understanding requires strength, and right now you do not have enough of it. The truth of the statement was difficult to deny. Asante leaned back slightly, her body betraying her resolve. Zainab turned to Dr. Bello. "Prepare a room," she said. He nodded and exited. Zainab looked back at Asante. "You are not a prisoner here," she said. "You may leave if you choose. But if you stay, you will follow what is necessary for your condition." Asante absorbed the words. "You will not force me?" she asked. "No," Zainab said. The answer mattered, more than anything else so far. Asante exhaled slowly. "Then I will stay," she said. Zainab inclined her head slightly. "Good." A nurse entered quietly and approached Asante with a glass of water. "Drink," she said gently. Asante took it, her hands trembling slightly, and drank slowly. The water felt different here, cooler, cleaner, more deliberate somehow. After a few moments, the nurse helped her stand. "We will take you to your room," she said. Asante followed her steps slower now, her body beginning to surrender to the exhaustion she had been holding back all day. They walked down a corridor lined with closed doors, each identical, each quiet. The nurse opened one. Inside was a small but comfortable room. A bed, clean sheets, a chair, a window with drawn curtains. Simple, but safe. Asante stepped inside. She looked at the bed. For a moment she did not move. Then slowly, she sat. The mattress gave beneath her weight. Soft, stable, real. Something inside her shifted. The nurse handed her a folded set of clothes. "You can change," she said. "We will return shortly." Asante nodded. When the nurse left the room, fell into silence. Asante sat there holding the clothes, staring at the space around her. This was not the road. This was not survival in its harshest form. This was something else, something she did not yet trust, but could not deny. Her hand moved again to her belly. "We are here," she whispered. For the first time in a long while, her voice carried something unfamiliar. Not certainty, not safety, but the beginning of relief. Outside the room in another part of the building, Kofi stood waiting. He had not rushed. He had not demanded immediate answers. But he was aware of every step that had led Asante here. And he knew that the next conversation between them would define everything that followed. Inside the room, Asante lay back slowly on the bed. Her body relaxed, just slightly. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in many nights, she slept. When Asante woke, it was not to the sound of horns or shouting, or the restless grind of a city that never softened its edges. It was to silence, not the empty silence of abandonment, but a quiet that held space. For a few seconds she did not remember where she was. Her body lay still, suspended between exhaustion and awareness. Her breathing slow, her mind catching up to the unfamiliar comfort beneath her. Then memory returned, fragment by fragment. The road, the card, the gate, the room. Her eyes opened. Soft light filtered through the curtains, pale and steady. The air felt cooler than outside, but not cold. Clean, controlled. The kind of environment she had only ever glimpsed from a distance. She shifted slightly. The pain in her body was still there, but different now. Less sharp, more contained. Her limbs felt heavy but not collapsing. For the first time in days, her body had not been forced to remain alert through the night. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby shifted gently. A small movement, but enough. She exhaled slowly. "We made it through the night," she whispered. There was a knock at the door, soft, measured. Asante straightened slightly. "Come in," she said. The door opened. A nurse entered first, followed by Dr. Bello. Behind them, after a brief pause, Zainab stepped in as well. "Good morning," the nurse said gently. Asante nodded. Dr. Bello approached, his expression calm. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Tired, Asante replied. But better. He nodded. That is expected. He conducted a brief check, asking questions, monitoring her responses, observing her carefully. When he finished, he stepped back. You will need continued rest, he said. Nutrition, monitoring. But for now there is improvement. Relief flickered across Asante's face. Zainab watched quietly. After a moment, she stepped forward. He is ready to see you, she said. Asante's chest tightened slightly. Now, she had known this moment would come, but knowing and facing were not the same. Do I have to? She asked. Zainab's gaze held hers. No, she said. But you came here for a reason. Asante looked down briefly, then nodded. Yes, she said. I will go. The nurse helped her stand. Her legs were steadier than the night before, but still weak. Each step required attention, control. Zainab led the way. They moved through the same corridor, but this time Asante noticed more. The quiet order, the absence of unnecessary movement, the sense that everything here followed intention. They stopped in front of a closed door. Zainab turned slightly. He will not harm you, she said. Asante met her eyes. I know, she replied, but knowing did not erase fear. Zainab opened the door. Inside the room was larger than the one Asante had slept in, but still restrained in its design. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking a section of the compound. No excess, no display of wealth. Kofi stood near the window. He turned when they entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt different now. On the road, there had been distance, noise, movement. Here, there was stillness, clarity. Zainab stepped back. I will be outside, she said. The door closed behind her. Asante and Kofi were alone. He gestured toward the chair opposite the desk. Please, he said. Asante moved slowly and sat. Kofi remained standing for a moment longer, then took his seat as well. He did not rush to speak, neither did she. The silence stretched, not empty but deliberate. Finally, Kofi spoke. You came, he said. Yes. Why? The question was direct. Asante considered it. Because I had no choice, she said. Kofi nodded once. That is honest. She looked at him. And you? She asked. Why did you offer? Kofi held her gaze. For the same reason, he said. She frowned slightly. You had a choice, she said. He did not respond immediately. Then, not entirely, he said. The answer unsettled her. What does that mean? She asked. Kofi leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the desk. It means, he said carefully, that sometimes a decision is made before you fully understand it. Asante watched him. That is not an answer, she said. A faint shift in his expression. Something almost like acknowledgement. No, he agreed. It is not. He paused, then continued. I saw you, he said. She said nothing. At the traffic light, he added. Before you collapsed. Her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. And, she asked, and something about that moment did not leave, he said. The simplicity of the statement felt incomplete. That is all, she pressed. No, Kofi said. A longer pause. I lost my wife, he said. The words changed the air. Asante blinked. I am sorry, she said automatically. Kofi inclined his head slightly. She was pregnant, he continued. Asante's breath caught. They both died, he said. Silence followed. Not heavy, not forced, just real. Asante looked down. I did not know, she said. You were not meant to, Kofi replied. Another pause. When I saw you, he said, I remembered something I have spent years trying not to remember. Asante lifted her eyes. And that is why you helped me, she asked. Kofi held her gaze. It is part of it, he said. Part. The word stayed with her. What is the rest, she asked. Kofi exhaled slowly. The rest is not simple, he said. Asante's expression hardened slightly. My life is not simple either, she replied. Something in her tone shifted the balance of the conversation. Kofi nodded. That is fair, he said. He leaned forward slightly now. I want to be clear with you, he said. There is no hidden condition for your being here. Asante studied him. No condition, she repeated. No, he said. Then why does it feel like there is one, she asked. Kofi did not look away. Because you have learned to expect one, he said. The truth of it landed quietly. Asante said nothing. Kofi continued. You will receive care here, he said. Medical attention, food, a place to stay. That does not change. And after she asked, the question was immediate, important. Kofi paused. That depends, he said. On what she asked, on what you choose, he replied. Asante frowned. What does that mean? She asked. Kofi held her gaze. It means I will not decide your future for you, he said. But I will not pretend I have no interest in it either. The words settled between them. Carefully, deliberately. Asante felt something shift again. Uncertainty mixing with something else she could not yet name. What kind of interest? She asked quietly. Kofi did not answer immediately. For the first time since the conversation began, there was hesitation in him. Not uncertainty, but restraint. We will speak about that, he said finally. When you are stronger. Asante leaned back slightly. You are still not telling me everything, she said. No, he agreed. Silence again, but different now, charged. Asante looked at him, truly, looked. This man was not like the others she had known. Not like Kola, not like the men on the street. But that did not mean he was safe. It only meant he was different. I will stay, she said finally. Kofi nodded. I expected that, he said. But she added, her voice steady now. I will not belong to you. The words were clear, firm, necessary. Kofi did not react immediately. Then I did not ask you to, he said. Their eyes held. Something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. The conversation had not resolved anything. It had not answered every question. But it had begun something neither of them could fully control. And, somewhere beneath the surface of it all, the real reason Kofi had brought her here was still waiting to be revealed. The days that followed did not transform Asante's life all at once. Safety, she quickly learned, did not immediately feel like peace. Sometimes it felt like suspicion in a clean room. Sometimes it felt like waking in the middle of the night because her body still expected cold pavement beneath her and noise at her back. Sometimes it felt like reaching for her plastic bowl before remembering it was no longer beside her bed. But slowly, her body began to believe what her mind still questioned. She ate regular meals, though. At first, her stomach rejected the richness of food that came too consistently after so many hungry days. She drank water, without counting the cost of each swallow. Dr. Bello monitored her closely, measuring not only the baby's progress but the exhaustion she had carried for too long. The sharp pains that had frightened her on the street lessened, though they did not disappear entirely. He told her again and again that stress had become a second burden inside her body and that healing would require more than medicine. Asante listened, but healing was not a thing she knew how to do, simply because someone told her she was allowed. The building where she stayed was part of a quiet residence used by Kofi's charitable foundation for temporary shelter staff training and recovery cases. Though no one described it to her in those exact words at first, she only understood that some of the women working there were nurses. Some were administrative staff, and some, like Zainab, seemed to belong to the structure of the place itself, as if they had long ago learned how to manage both people and secrets. Zainab remained polite, efficient, and difficult to read. She ensured Asante had what she needed, but never softened into familiarity. There was always a distance in her tone, as though compassion to her was best delivered without emotional clutter. And yet Asante noticed the details. The extra blanket folded at the edge of her bed before a cooler night. The sandals placed beside the door in the correct size. The fruit left in her room after Dr. Bello remarked that she needed more iron. Zainab cared, but she cared in a way that did not ask to be thanked. By the fourth day, Asante was strong enough to walk farther through the compound. By the sixth, she was allowed short periods in the garden, where trimmed shrubs and white stone paths made the place feel almost impossibly calm. She often sat on a shaded bench with one hand resting over her belly, watching birds move through the low branches, and wondering how a life could shift so quickly and still not feel secure. Kofi did not come to see her every day. That unsettled her, more than constant attention would have. He appeared rarely, and when he did, it was never casually. A question about her health, a brief exchange in the corridor, one quiet conversation in the garden where he asked whether she needed anything else, and she answered answers before looking away. He had not seemed offended, only thoughtful. It was during one of those afternoons when the air was warm and still, and Asante had just finished a slow walk under Dr. Bello's instructions, that the first crack in her fragile new calm appeared. Two women from the kitchen area passed near the garden entrance, not realizing she could hear them through the open window. "She is the one of them whispered. "The pregnant girl, yes, the one he brought himself." A brief pause. "They say the child's father is married into politics. No, that is not the real story. I heard Madame Zainab telling someone the chairman himself asked for legal files, for what I do not know. But why would a man like him bring in a girl from the street, unless something deeper is involved?" The other woman lowered her voice further, but not enough. "Maybe he wants the baby." The sentence struck Asante so sharply that for a moment she forgot to breathe. The women moved on, their voices fading, but the words remained. "Maybe he wants the baby." At first she rejected the thought so fiercely that it felt almost insulting. No, impossible, absurd. But once a suspicion enters a wounded mind, it does not need proof to survive. It only needs fear. That evening, Asante was quieter than usual. She barely touched her food. When the nurse asked if she felt unwell, she said only that she was tired. But inside, her thoughts had begun to circle. Kofi's hesitation, his unfinished sentences, the way he had said he had an interest in her future, the fact that he had lost a wife and unborn child, the way everyone around him obeyed without explanation. By nightfall, suspicion had become something harder, heavier. What if the kindness had direction? What if the shelter was real but not free? What if all of this had never truly been about her? The next morning, Tariq arrived. Asante had seen him once before from a distance, moving beside Kofi with the quiet precision of a man whose job was to anticipate needs before they were spoken. He was younger than Kofi, sharply dressed, observant, and never careless with words. This time, Zainab led him into the sitting room, where Asante had been drinking tea. "This is Mr. Tariq," Zainab said. "He needs a few minutes." Asante stiffened immediately, for what Zainab's expression remained calm. Administrative matters. That phrase alone made Asante wary. "I am not signing anything," she said. Tariq spoke for the first time, his tone controlled and respectful. "You are not being asked to sign anything today." Today. The word did not comfort her. Zainab left them alone. Tariq sat across from her, leaving appropriate distance between them. "Chairman Mensah asked me to explain a few protections available to you," he said. "Legal protections, medical provisions, security if necessary." Asante kept her face still. "Security from who?" "Potential harassment," Tariq replied. "From the man called Kola. From media interest if your presence here becomes known. From any attempt to pressure you. Media, pressure, legal protections." The conversation was becoming too structured, too prepared. And why would there be legal matters, she asked. Tariq paused just for a second, but it was enough, because in complicated situations involving an unborn child, he said carefully, "It is wise to clarify rights early." The room seemed to shrink. Asante's fingers tightened around the cup in her hands. "Rights," she repeated. "Yes. Whose rights?" Tariq held her gaze, but his answer came too slowly. "The child's," he said. "The child's, not hers." Something cold moved through Asante's chest. She set the cup down before her shaking hands could betray her. "And Chairman Mensah is interested in those rights?" she asked. Tariq must have realized then that the conversation had shifted in a dangerous direction. "He is interested in ensuring the child is protected." "As in taking the child," no, Tariq said quickly. "Not in that sense. Not in that sense." The phrase only deepened the wound opening inside her. Asante stood up too fast. The room spun slightly, but anger kept her upright. "What sense?" then she demanded. "Say it clearly." Tariq rose as well, but kept his voice measured. "Please do not misunderstand." "Then explain." For the first time since entering the house, her voice rose enough to cut through the careful silence of the room. Tariq exhaled slowly. "Chairman Mensah asked me to prepare only as a precaution documents for emergency guardianship consideration, if there were severe complications during delivery." The words landed one by one. Emergency, guardianship, complications. Asante stared at him. For a second she could not process the sentence as a whole. Then it assembled itself inside her with brutal clarity. Kofi had already imagined a future in which she died, and in that future he had reached for her child. "Get out," she said. Tariq blinked. "Miss Asante, get out." Her voice broke on the last word. The door opened almost immediately. Zainab stepped in, followed by Kofi a moment later. Alerted by the sound, he took in the scene at once. Tariq standing, Asante trembling, the untouched tea, the air split open by betrayal. "What happened?" Kofi asked. Asante turned toward him, and whatever he saw in her face made him stop. "You tell me," she said, her voice low now, shaking with more pain than rage. "Was this your kindness?" Kofi's eyes moved to Tariq. Tariq spoke carefully. "I explained the emergency legal protections. Too late, Kofi seemed to understand the damage." "Asante." "No," she cut in. "You brought me here because of the baby. That is not the whole truth, but it is part of it," she said, stepping back. "Isn't it?" Kofi did not answer quickly enough. That silence answered for him. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice did not collapse. "You saw me on the street and decided I was weak enough to save, and if I did not survive, you would keep what was left of me." "That is not what this is," Kofi said, and for the first time there was strain in his calm. "Then what is it?" He took a step toward her. "I was trying to make sure the child would never be abandoned." "And what about me?" she asked. The question hit the room like a blow. Kofi stopped. Asante pressed a hand to her chest as if the pain there had become physical. "Did you ever think that maybe I did not want to be rescued only to be replaced?" His face changed, then not into defensiveness, but into something far more dangerous. Guilt. And Asante knew in that moment that whatever he felt for her, he had still made plans around her pain without asking permission. She looked at Zainab, at Tariq, then back at Kofi. "I was right not to trust this," she whispered. And for the first time since entering his world, Asante felt the safety around her turn into a cage. The days after Asante's first private conversation with Kofi moved with a strange kind of gentleness, and that gentleness was exactly what made her uneasy. Nothing bad happened. No one raised a hand to her. No one insulted her. No one reminded her that she had once slept beside shop fronts or sold candy at traffic lights while people laughed at her pain. Meals arrived on time. Dr. Bello checked on her twice a day. The nurses spoke softly. Fresh clothes appeared in her room before she needed to ask. The pillows were changed. The curtains washed, the floor always clean. Her body, which had spent months bracing itself against hunger, heat, fear, and shame, slowly began to soften under steady care. But her mind did not follow as quickly. Safety felt too new to trust. Every morning she woke for a moment, believing she was back on the roadside, and every morning the quiet room startled her all over again. Sometimes she lay still before opening her eyes, listening for the sound of buses grinding past, for drunken laughter, for metal shutters being raised. But there was only the muted hush of the building and the distant movements of staff who knew how to walk without disturbing others. In that silence, she often felt more exposed than hidden. On the street, danger had at least been honest. Here, kindness came wrapped in closed doors, unanswered questions, and careful expressions. Still, she was healing. That was undeniable. The swelling in her feet went down. The sharp cramps that had frightened her outside became less frequent. The baby's movements grew stronger, more regular, and each time the little life shifted beneath her palm. Asante felt a fierce private gratitude she did not know how to put into words. She began taking short walks in the garden in the late afternoons, moving slowly along the stone paths between trimmed hedges and flowering shrubs. The place did not look like part of the same city that had nearly broken her. Sometimes she sat beneath a small shade tree and watched the light change over the compound walls, wondering how many women had crossed a threshold like this and still found it hard to rest. Zainab remained efficient, composed, and difficult to read. She made sure everything was done properly, but warmth never fully entered her voice. And yet, Asante noticed what was harder to name. Zainab always sent food that matched Dr. Bello's instructions, always knew when her laundry should be done, always ensured her room was stocked with fruit, medicine, and drinking water. Care lived in the details, even when tenderness did not. Kofi, by contrast, remained present without becoming constant. That unsettled Asante in a different way. He did not hover. He did not force long conversations. He asked after her health, once in the hallway, spoke to Dr. Bello more than he spoke to her, and passed through the building with the contained focus of a man used to carrying many responsibilities at once. Yet every time he appeared, the air around him seemed to tighten slightly, as though the space itself recognized authority before words were spoken. Asante could not decide whether his restraint reassured her or made him harder to understand. One afternoon, nearly a week after her arrival, she was sitting near the open window of a quiet lounge, folding a small blanket one of the nurses had brought for the baby. The sight of it on her lap filled her with a tenderness so sudden it almost hurt. She had never owned anything for the child yet. Until recently, even imagining such a thing had felt dangerous. She ran her fingers over the soft fabric and tried just for a moment to picture a future in which she would not always be surviving, minute by minute. That was when she heard voices in the corridor. They belonged to two women from the domestic staff, speaking in low tones as they passed by, unaware that the open window carried sound more clearly than they expected. "She is the one chairman brought himself," one woman whispered. "The pregnant girl. Yes, the same one from the road." A pause followed. Then the second woman asked, "Why would a man like that involve himself so much?" The first lowered her voice further, but not enough. "I heard Mr. Tariq speaking with legal people this morning." "Legal people? About what? I don't know everything, but they said something about documents protection and the child." "The child?" Asante's hands froze on the blanket. The women kept walking. The second voice came again, more hushed now, almost disbelieving. "Do you think he wants to adopt the baby?" I said, "I don't know." The first replied quickly, "But rich people do not move like this without a reason." Their footsteps faded. The room remained quiet. But inside Asante, something had already broken open. At first she told herself not to be foolish. Staff gossiped everywhere. People built stories out of half-heard facts. She knew that. She had been the subject of enough whispers to understand how easily lies were born. Yet the words would not leave her. Legal people, documents, protection, the child. Her hand moved slowly to her belly. The baby shifted, as if sensing her tension. "No," she whispered. "No." But once fear takes hold, it does not wait for evidence. It begins to gather old doubts and arrange them into patterns. Kofi's unfinished answers. His grief over his dead wife and unborn child. The way he had said he had an interest in her future. The way everyone around him treated his decisions as final before she fully understood them. One by one, those things returned to her, no longer disconnected, but joined by suspicion. By evening, she had barely touched her food. When the nurse asked if she felt sick, Asante said she was only tired. It was easier than explaining the sharper ache that had taken root inside her, an ache made not of illness but of mistrust. The next morning, Tariq arrived. Asante recognized him immediately, though they had never spoken at length. He was the kind of man who looked as though nothing in his life happened by accident. His shirt was crisp, his posture precise, his expression polite without ever becoming familiar. He entered the lounge where Asante sat with Zainab beside him. "Mr. Tariq needs a few minutes," Zainab said. Asante's body grew alert at once. "For what?" "Administrative clarification," Zainab replied. The phrase made Asante's spine stiffen. "I am not signing anything," she said. Tariq raised a calming hand. "No one is asking you to sign anything today." "Today?" The word struck her immediately. Zainab noticed it too, but said nothing. She only gave Tariq a measured glance before stepping aside. "I will be nearby." When she left, Tariq sat across from Asante, leaving deliberate space between them. "Chairman Mensah asked me to explain certain protections available to you," he began. "Medical, legal, and personal security should they become necessary." Asante kept her face still. Necessary for what? Tariq folded his hands. "Your situation has complications. The child's father may become disruptive. There may also be public interest if your connection to this residence becomes known." The child's father, public interest, complications. His language was careful, but that carefulness only sharpened her unease. "And why would there be legal protection?" she asked. "Because cases involving vulnerable mothers and unborn children can become difficult," Tariq replied. "It is wise to prepare." Prepare what he hesitated only a fraction of a second, but she saw it. "Possible documentation," he said. "For who?" "For you, for the child, not for us, not for your family, for the child." Asante leaned forward slightly. "Be clear." Tariq seemed to realize then that vagueness would no longer serve him. In the event of severe medical complications during delivery, he said carefully, there may need to be a temporary guardianship arrangement to secure the baby's welfare. The room went cold. Asante stared at him without blinking. "A guardianship arrangement," she repeated. "Yes, but only if." "For who?" she asked again, her voice lower now. Tariq did not answer quickly enough. That was enough. Her hand tightened over the arm of the chair. "For Kofi," Tariq exhaled slowly. Chairman Mensah asked that emergency options be reviewed. Emergency options reviewed. Every polished phrase felt like a blade wrapped in silk. Asante stood up so abruptly, the chair scraped against the floor. The sound split the room. Her heart was beating hard now, not from physical strain, but from the terrible clarity blooming inside her. "So that is it," she said. "Miss Asante, please. He saw me on the road, brought me here, and all this time he was planning for my child. That is not a fair reading of what I said. It is exactly the reading of what you said." Tariq rose too, but kept his tone measured. He was trying to make sure the baby would never be left unprotected. The baby. Again the baby. Not you, not Asante, not the mother whose body had carried that child through shame, hunger, and humiliation. Her voice shook when she spoke, but not from weakness. And what about me? Before Tariq could answer, the door opened. Zainab entered, first her face tightening as she took in the scene. Kofi came a heartbeat later, drawn by the raised voices. He stopped the moment he saw Asante's expression. "What happened?" he asked. Asante turned toward him, and the pain in her face was worse than anger. "You tell me," she said. "Was this your kindness?" Kofi looked at Tariq. Tariq answered carefully. I explained the emergency guardianship review. For the first time since she had met him, something in Kofi's calm cracked. Not fully, but enough. "Asante," he began, stepping toward her. She stepped back at once. "No, it is not what you think." "Then what is it?" His silence lasted only a second, but it was the wrong second to lose. "I was trying to protect the child," he said. The words landed exactly where they would do the most damage. Asante laughed then, but it was a small, wounded sound. "Of course. The child." Kofi's voice tightened. "And you. But you planned for me to die," she said. "That is not what I planned. You made arrangements, in case something went wrong, so you could keep what was left." The sentence struck the room into silence. Kofi's face changed not into anger, but into something heavier. Guilt, recognition, too late. Asante felt tears rise, but she did not let them fall. "You looked at me and decided I was helpless enough to save and weak enough to plan around." "That is not true. Then why was I the last person to know he had no answer fast enough to undo the wound?" Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "I trusted this place enough to sleep, to eat, to breathe without fear. And all this time you were making legal plans for my baby without me." Kofi's voice was quieter now. "I was afraid." The confession startled even Tariq, but Asante only stared at him. Afraid of what his jaw tightened, of losing another child. Another child. The truth in those words was real. So was the injury they carried. Asante shook her head slowly. "This baby is not yours to lose." Then she looked at Zainab, at Tariq, and finally back at Kofi. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it cut deeper than anything louder could have. "I was right not to trust this peace." And in that moment, the safety of the house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a beautiful place, built around a decision that had never truly belonged to her. After that confrontation, the house no longer felt quiet to Asante. It felt watchful. Nothing visible changed at first. The nurses still moved gently. Meals still arrived on time. Dr. Bello still knocked before entering. The curtains were still drawn back in the morning to let in light. The garden still held the same trimmed hedges, the same stone path, the same soft afternoon breeze. But once trust had cracked, every kindness became harder to receive. Every closed door seemed to conceal a conversation. Every lowered voice sounded like something being decided beyond her reach. For 2 days, Asante avoided Kofi completely. When she heard his footsteps in the corridor, she remained inside her room. When Zainab told her Dr. Bello would like her to walk in the garden, she asked to go earlier than usual, before the chairman was likely to return from work. She answered questions briefly, only because her baby demanded what her pride wanted to refuse, and spoke to no one about the fear tightening inside her. But fear was no longer the only thing living there. There was humiliation too, the kind that comes when a person realizes she has rested her full weight for even a short time on ground that was never fully hers. She had come into that compound desperate and suspicious, and slowly, against her better judgment, she had allowed herself to believe that maybe some part of the care around her was simply human, that maybe she had not been brought in as a problem to be managed or a burden to be calculated, to discover that Legal documents had been considered, that her death had been quietly included in someone else's planning. Made every soft blanket and every careful meal feel tangled with something she could not bear. On the third evening, Zainab came to her room with a bowl of pepper soup and found it untouched from lunch. "You cannot keep doing this," Zainab said. Asante sat by the window, one hand over her belly, staring at the compound wall beyond the garden. "I am eating enough," she replied. "No, you are not." Asante did not turn. Zainab stood in silence for a moment, then set the fresh bowl down on the table. "Whether you are angry or not, the child still needs you." Something in that sentence snapped the fragile restraint Asante had been holding together. "The child," she said, turning at last. "Always the child." Zainab's expression shifted only slightly. "That is not what I meant. It is what everybody means," Asante replied, her voice trembling. "Do you know what it feels like to stand in a room and hear people discuss your baby like a file, a future arrangement? No one is taking your child, but they planned for it." Zainab inhaled slowly, as if choosing each word before letting it out. "Chairman Mensah made that decision from fear, not cruelty." Asante let out a bitter laugh. "Fear still controls people." Zainab did not deny it. "He lost a wife and child," she said quietly. "Sometimes grief teaches the wrong lesson." Asante looked down. That truth hurt because it felt real. She could believe his fear. She could believe his loss had twisted itself into a desperate need to prepare for the worst. But understanding a wound did not mean she had to live inside what it made him do. "He should have asked me," she said. "Yes," Zainab replied after a pause. "He should have." The admission hung between them. Asante pressed her palm more firmly against her belly. The baby moved a strong rolling motion that made her jaw tighten. "I cannot stay here," she whispered. Zainab heard her clearly. "You should not leave in this condition, and I should stay where they plan around me. No one is planning around you now." Asante said nothing. Zainab stepped closer, but not too close. "You are angry. You have a right to be. But anger is a poor guide when your body is already under strain." Asante finally looked at her. "Then what should guide me? Gratitude?" "No," Zainab said. "Clarity." That night Asante did not sleep well. She drifted in and out of shallow rest, waking each time she turned and felt the bulk of her pregnancy. Each time the baby shifted, each time memory returned like cold water poured over her chest. By dawn, she had made the decision. Not because she felt strong, but because staying had begun to feel like surrender. She would leave. Not to punish Kofi, not to prove anything, but because she needed to stand somewhere that belonged to her, even if that place was hard. When morning came, she dressed quietly in the plain maternity gown they had given her, then changed her mind and put back on one of the simple dresses from the bundle Zainab had arranged for her. It was not beautiful, but it was hers now in a way the room was not. She folded 2 pieces of baby cloth, a wrapper, and a bottle of water into a small nylon bag. There was almost nothing else to take. As she reached the door, a cramp tightened across her abdomen. She froze, waited, breathed. The pain passed, but slower than she liked. "Not now," she murmured. "Please." No one stopped her in the corridor. The building was quieter than usual. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed softly at something another staff member said. In the distance, plates clinked. Ordinary sounds. Almost enough to make her question herself. Almost. She walked steadily toward the back exit that led near the service path. Zainab had once taken her that way to avoid the afternoon heat. Asante remembered enough of the route to try it alone. At the end of the corridor, she saw Tariq speaking to a guard through an open office door. Her heart jumped. She turned quickly into a side passage and kept walking, slower now, careful not to draw attention. Every step felt louder than it should. Her bag seemed too small, too obvious. The baby moved again. A pulse of fear ran through her, but she kept going. She reached the service exit. Unlocked. The sight almost made her laugh from the shock of it. For a second she stood looking at the door, half expecting someone to call her name. No one did. She stepped outside. The morning air hit her face, warm and slightly damp. Beyond the compound wall, the city was already awake. Traffic murmured in the distance. A generator coughed somewhere nearby. Life, harsh and ordinary, waited just beyond the quiet order of the place she was leaving behind. Asante moved down the path and out through the side gate used by delivery workers. The guard stationed there was checking a receipt book and did not look up in time to study her face. Then she was out, free, and suddenly frightened by what freedom meant. For the first half hour, she moved slowly, keeping to shaded edges, following roads she thought would lead toward a busier commercial stretch where she could disappear more easily. She did not know exactly where she was going, only away. Away from the compound, away from soft sheets and hidden documents, away from Kofi's grief and the dangerous comfort it had offered. By late morning the heat had thickened, sweat gathered at the back of her neck. Her legs had begun to ache again, and the pain in her lower abdomen returned in irregular waves, enough to make her stop sometimes and lean against walls until her breathing steadied. The farther she went, the more unreal her plan began to feel. She had no room, no savings, no safe place waiting. The city she had fled back into did not look kinder simply because she had chosen it. At a roadside kiosk, she spent one of the few notes Zainab had left in her drawer for emergency transport and bought a sachet of water and a bread roll she could barely swallow. The woman selling them glanced at her swollen belly and then away, uninterested. The indifference hurt less than pity. Around noon, clouds began to gather. The light dimmed from white to dull gray. Wind pushed wrappers along the roadside. People looked up, gauging whether rain would come hard or pass lightly. Asante quickened her steps as much as she could, hoping to find shelter before the weather broke. Then the first drop fell, then another. Within minutes the sky opened. Rain hammered the corrugated roofs of stalls and shops, bounced off the road, and turned dust into dark mud. People rushed under awnings. Traffic slowed. The smell of wet asphalt rose thick and immediate. Asante made it under the narrow shelter of a closed storefront just before the rain became a sheet. She bent forward, hand on her belly, trying to calm the rising pressure inside her. The pain came again. Stronger. This time she could not pretend it was only stress. Her breath hitched. She gripped the metal shutter behind her. "No," she whispered. "No, not yet." Across the city, in a boardroom where numbers had been discussed all morning with practiced calm, Kofi received the call from Zainab. He did not speak for several seconds after hearing the words. She left Zainab's voice on the line, was tight in a way he had never heard before. Sometime after dawn, the side exit. Kofi was already standing. When? We don't know exactly. His chair fell back behind him. Every controlled layer he had built over years of discipline seemed to tear at once. Not because Asante had defied him, but because the city beyond those walls was wet, huge, indifferent, and full of places where a pregnant woman already under strain could vanish in a single afternoon. He left the meeting without explanation. By the time he got into the car, the rain had begun, and somewhere beneath a shuttered storefront, gripping her belly as another pain ripped through her, Asante understood with terror that this was no longer only escape. Something was happening, and she was alone in it. The rain did not fall gently. It crashed down in thick sheets, turning the road into a blur of water and movement, swallowing sound and then throwing it back, louder engines, struggling horns, blaring voices rising as people fought for space beneath narrow shelters. The metal shutter behind Asante vibrated with every drop that struck it. Water ran in thin streams along the ground, pooling around her feet, soaking the hem of her dress until it clung heavily to her legs. She could not focus on any of it. Another wave of pain tore through her. This one was different, deeper, more demanding. It did not pass quickly. It built, tightened, held her body in its grip until her breath broke into uneven gasps. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her hand pressing hard against her belly. "No, please, not here." She tried to stand straighter, but her legs weakened beneath her. Her back slid down against the cold metal until she was half crouched, half sitting on the wet ground. The baby shifted violently inside her, and fear surged so sharply it almost drowned out the pain. "Stay," she begged under her breath. "Stay a little longer." A woman standing under the same shelter glanced down at her, then quickly looked away. A man moved slightly to create more space for himself, careful not to step too close. No one spoke. No one asked. In Lagos, suffering in public was common enough to become part of the background. But Asante was no longer part of the background. Another contraction came, stronger. Her fingers clawed at the shutter behind her. A cry escaped her before she could stop it, raw and involuntary. This time people looked, not with concern, with attention, the kind that gathers before deciding whether to help or simply watch. "She is in labor," someone said. "Too early," another replied. "Call someone." The questions rose and fell without resolution. Asante's vision blurred. The edges of the world seemed to dim and sharpen at the same time, as though her body was trying to decide whether to hold on or let go. Across the city, Kofi's car cut through traffic with a force that no longer resembled patience. "Faster," he said. The driver did not need to be told twice. Rain streaked across the windshield wipers, fighting to keep up. Streets that had seemed manageable hours before were now clogged, slippery, unpredictable. Motorbikes weaved between vehicles. Pedestrians darted through gaps. Every delay stretched time thinner. "Sir, the roads," the driver began. I said faster. There was no anger in Kofi's voice, only urgency. In the back seat, his hands were no longer still. One gripped the edge of the seat. The other pressed briefly against his chest, as though steadying something inside him that had come loose. Zainab's words replayed in his mind. She left. The image of Asante on the street returned, only this time it did not remain a memory. It moved forward, placing her back into the very danger he had pulled her from. The difference was that now he knew her name. Now he knew her condition. Now he knew exactly how fragile the line was between survival and loss. He closed his eyes for a moment. Abena, the rain, the crash, the child who had never taken a breath. His eyes opened again. "Call Dr. Bello," he said. Tariq, seated beside him, was already dialing. Meanwhile, beneath the shelter, Asante's world narrowed into pain. Voices blurred, faces lost shape. The only thing that remained clear was the rhythm inside her body, the relentless tightening that no longer waited for her consent. "Help," she managed, though she did not know to whom she was speaking. A younger woman crouched slightly beside her, now uncertain but moved. "She needs a hospital," the woman said. How someone else replied, "Look at the road." Another contraction came. Asante's body folded inward. A scream tore from her throat. This time, it cut through the rain. Something changed in the crowd. Not kindness, but urgency. A man stepped forward. "Move back," he said. "Give her space." Someone else pulled out a phone. Another shouted for a vehicle, but chaos does not organize itself easily. Time stretched. Asante's grip on consciousness wavered. Her head fell forward, then jerked back as another wave hit. Her body trembled not from cold, but from the sheer force of what it was enduring. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't." "You can," the young woman beside her said quickly, though her voice shook. "Stay with me. Stay." Across the road, a black SUV forced its way through stalled traffic, ignoring honks sliding into gaps that barely existed. "Stop here," Kofi said before the car had fully slowed. He opened the door before the driver could respond. Rain hit him instantly, soaking through his clothes within seconds. He did not notice. His eyes scanned the street. Then he saw her. For a fraction of a second, everything else disappeared. The crowd, the noise, the rain, all of it collapsed into a single point. Asante, on the ground, her body bent in pain. He moved, fast, direct. People parted without understanding why. Some recognized him. Most did not. It did not matter. He reached her, just as another contraction hit. Her fingers were gripping the metal shutter so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale beneath the wet sheen of her skin. Asante, her name, spoken clearly. She heard it, barely, her eyes lifted, through rain, through pain, through the haze of exhaustion. She saw him. For a moment, something like disbelief flickered across her face. "You," she whispered. "I am here," he said. No hesitation, no distance. He crouched beside her, ignoring the water soaking through his clothes, the mud on the ground, the eyes watching. "You should not have come," she said, her voice breaking. Another contraction cut through her words. Her body arched. Kofi's hand moved instinctively to support her shoulder, steady but careful. "You are not doing this here," he said. She shook her head weakly. "I didn't want to stay." "I know," he said. The admission surprised even him. "I know." Tariq reached them already, speaking into the phone. "We need immediate access. Yes, now prepare the emergency unit." The young woman who had been beside Asante stepped back relieved and overwhelmed at once. Kofi looked at Asante again. "You are going to the hospital," he said. She tried to resist even now. "No, I can." Another contraction silenced her. This one longer, more violent. Her grip tightened around his sleeve. Kofi did not pull away. When it passed, she was shaking. "I'm scared," she whispered. The words were small, unprotected. Kofi felt something shift deep inside him, something he had buried for years beneath control and distance. "I know," he said. It was not a solution, but it was the truth. He lifted her carefully. Her weight was lighter than it should have been. That fact struck him harder than anything else. As he carried her toward the car, the crowd parted fully, now watching, whispering, recording, reacting. Someone said, "That is Kofi Mensah." Another voice, the chairman himself. But those words no longer reached him. Inside the car, Tariq cleared space. Dr. Bello's voice came through the phone again. "Urgent now. Get her here immediately. Do not delay." Kofi settled Asante into the seat, supporting her as the car door slammed shut. "Go!" he said. The vehicle surged forward. Inside, the world shrank again, not into isolation, but into focus. Asante's head rested briefly against his shoulder between waves of pain. "You came back," she murmured. Kofi looked down at her. "Yes." Her fingers tightened weakly against his sleeve. "I thought you only wanted the baby." The words cut deeper than accusation. Kofi did not look away. "I was wrong," he said quietly, "in how I did things." Another contraction came. She cried out. He held her steady. "But I did not come back for the baby," he added. She barely heard, or maybe she did, because even through the pain, something in her grip shifted. Not trust, not yet, but something less resistant. The car sped through the rain. Ahead, lights cut through the storm. The hospital waited, and within it, a moment that would decide everything. The hospital lights cut through the rain, like something firm in a world that had been shifting too quickly. By the time the car stopped, the entrance was already prepared. A stretcher stood ready. Two nurses rushed forward with practiced urgency. and Dr. Bello emerged from the sliding doors, his coat already damp at the edges, from stepping out into the storm. "Careful," he said, his voice steady even as everything else moved fast. Kofi stepped out first, then turned immediately back to Asante. She was no longer fully aware of her surroundings. Her breaths came in sharp bursts, her body tightening and releasing in waves that had grown too strong to ignore, too close together to count. "I'm here," he said, though he did not know if she could hear him. Her fingers still clung weakly to his sleeve. The nurses transferred her onto the stretcher with quick, efficient movements. Asante cried out again, her voice raw, now stripped of any attempt to contain it. Rain hit her face, but she did not seem to notice. Inside, Dr. Bello instructed. They moved, through the doors, into light. The shift was immediate. Bright corridors, clean floors controlled motion. The chaos of the street was left behind, but the urgency followed them in. "Vitals," Dr. Bello said. "Prepare for early delivery." The words landed heavy with implication. Early. Not planned. Not safe in the way they had hoped. Asante's eyes fluttered open briefly as they wheeled her down the corridor. The ceiling lights passed above her in quick succession, blurring into a streak of white. Her hand moved again, searching until it found something familiar. Kofi's arm. He walked beside the stretcher, not letting go. "You're not leaving," she whispered. "No," he said. Her eyes closed again. They reached the delivery room. Doors swung open. The medical team moved into position. Kofi, Dr. Bello said, his tone shifting slightly. "You need to wait outside." For a moment, Kofi did not move. Then he looked down at Asante. Her face was pale beneath the strain, her body trembling, her breath uneven. "I'll be here," he said. Her fingers loosened from his sleeve as the nurses guided her inside. The doors closed, and just like that, he was no longer in control of anything. The corridor felt too still, too quiet. The rain continued outside, faint now through the walls, but inside there was only the low hum of machines' distant footsteps and the steady ticking of time that refused to slow. Tariq approached his usual composure, softened by concern. "They are prepared," he said. Kofi nodded once. Neither of them sat. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost its shape. From behind the doors, faint sounds emerged, voices, instructions, the rise and fall of urgency. Once a sharp cry cut through the silence, and Kofi's entire body tensed as though the sound had struck him physically. He closed his eyes briefly. Not again. The thought came uninvited. Not like this. The memory of another hospital, another night, another loss, pressed against his chest with unbearable weight. He had stood in a corridor like this before, waiting for news that had shattered everything he believed could be rebuilt. He exhaled slowly, forced himself back into the present. This was not that night. It could not be. Inside the room, Asante fought. Her world had narrowed to pain, to breath, to the relentless demand of her body to do something she could not stop, could not delay, could not fully understand. Voices came and went around her. Doctor Bello, the nurse's instructions, spoken clearly, firmly. "Breathe, Asante. Stay with us." "I can't," she gasped. "You can." Hands supported her, guided her, held her steady when her strength faltered. Another contraction, stronger. Her body arched. A scream tore from her throat. Outside, Kofi heard it. His hands tightened at his sides. Inside, Dr. Bello's voice cut through the tension. "We are close. Stay with me." Asante's vision blurred. Tears mixed with sweat. Her thoughts fractured into fragments, pain, fear, memory. The echo of Kola's voice, the feel of cold pavement, the quiet of the room she had left the moment Kofi had stepped into the rain and said her name. "I'm here." The memory anchored her, barely. Another push, another wave, then a sound, different, sharp, new, a cry, high, alive. The room shifted instantly. Relief broke through tension. The baby cried again. Strong, clear. Dr. Bello exhaled. The child is here. Asante's body went still. For a moment, everything stopped. She tried to speak, but the word failed. The nurse leaned close, her voice soft now. Your baby is here, she said. Alive. Tears spilled from Asante's eyes, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Something she had not allowed herself to believe was possible, until that exact moment. Outside the door opened. Kofi looked up. Dr. Bello stepped out, removing his gloves. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, the baby is alive, Dr. Bello said. The words landed, heavy, real, and Asante Kofi asked. She is stable, Dr. Bello replied. Exhausted, but she made it. Kofi's shoulders lowered slightly. A breath he did not realize he had been holding left him. For the first time since the call, since the rain, since the moment he saw her on the ground, he allowed himself to feel relief. Hours later, when the urgency had settled and the night had deepened into something quieter, Kofi stood outside Asante's room. He did not enter immediately. He knocked. Soft. Come in, her voice came weak but steady. He stepped inside. The room was dimly lit. Asante lay in the bed, her face pale but calmer now, her body finally still. In her arms, wrapped in a small cloth, was the child. Kofi stopped a few steps inside. For a moment, he did not speak. Asante looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes now, only exhaustion, and something else. Something quieter. You stayed, she said. Yes. A pause. She looked down at the baby, then back at him. You were wrong, she said softly. Kofi nodded. I know. Another pause. You planned for a future without me, she continued. I did. The honesty mattered, more than any explanation. Asante adjusted the child slightly in her arms. But I am still here, she said. Yes, and this is my child. Kofi held her gaze. I know, he said. Silence settled between them. Not empty, not tense, just real. Finally, Asante spoke again. If you want to be part of this life, she said, it will not be because you decided it. Kofi did not move. It will be because I allow it, she added. The words were not harsh, but they were firm, clear, earned. Kofi inclined his head slightly. That is how it should be, he said. Another quiet moment passed. Then slowly, Asante shifted the baby slightly, just enough that the child's face turned toward him. Do you want to see? She asked. Kofi stepped closer, carefully, as if approaching something fragile. Because he was. He looked down. The child's face was small, still adjusting to the world, eyes closed, breath steady. Alive. Something inside him moved in a way he could not control. Not grief, not fear, something new. Asante watched him. You cannot fix what happened before, she said quietly. I know, but you can choose what you do next. Kofi lifted his eyes to hers. I will not make decisions without you again, he said. This time there was no hesitation. Asante studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Not full trust, not yet. But something had shifted. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, a new life had begun. And for the first time, neither of them stood alone in the moment that mattered most. In life, we often believe that power, money, or control can protect us from loss, pain, or uncertainty. But this story reminds us of something deeper. True strength is not in controlling outcomes, it is in showing up when things fall apart. Asante had nothing yet. She held on to dignity, love, and courage, even when the world gave her none. And Kofi, despite everything he had built, had to learn that healing does not come from planning for loss, but from choosing connection over fear. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Your voice matters. And if you believe in stories of hope, justice, and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Someone out there might need this story today.